Hello, my name is Matt Harrison,
I'm Jack Maxwell.
and this is our presentation on Heartland then versus now and what's to come. So we're going to start off by taking a look at just sort of older Heartland, what we focused on primarily during class from like the pre-war to post-war and into the 80s, and then we'll transition to sort of more modern Heartland from like the downfall of the rails and the industry crisis, and now into sort of the addiction crisis and olding population, and then we'll move from there into seeing like we'll discuss where do we think Heartland is going? Do we think it'll survive? Do we think it'll die out? And yeah, pretty much that. So
A good thing to look at right here is the dynamics of Heartland community. Community in the Heartland is mostly, well, it basically defines the Heartland itself. You can't have these Heartland towns and these Heartland cultures and traditions without the community. Mm-hmm. So we'll look at the dynamics and how it has changed from the past, from specifically post-World War II to, well, the time frame that Matt already mentioned. And then we'll obviously look at it post-COVID, because COVID was a significant event, and it did alter the culture of many Heartland communities. So we're going to take a long look at those.
all right, so to start off, we'll just discuss a bit of old Heartland. So like Heartland definitely came around from community and stuff like that. It definitely, like, it was people branching out and finding sort of settling down and creating a life in what was essentially at the time like just no man's land in America.
Exactly.
And just creating these small towns, and through that they were able to build up into these huge communities with tight-knit connections and creating all sorts of traditions with each other. And
yeah, and obviously, but most of these towns, it started basically, when it was still the frontier, when Indiana and Illinois and all these Heartland states were unpopulated. So it started these rural agricultural towns, and then it slowly, as the times moved on, as industrialization came along, there was some evolution within the town. It went from rural agricultural small town to more businesses, more like Matt said, like the railroads we saw in Bloomington, specifically the radio company, and just now it's it's a little bit different, but the core principles in each community, I think, have stayed mostly the same. That's what defines the Heartland, togetherness within the community and things like that. But looking more specifically at, let's say one of the documentaries we watched in class, Bloomington, Remember When, you see within the town, back then, specifically the 50s and post-war, it's always, it's the railroad, it's the quarries, the limestone quarries around Bloomington, and it's the radio factory. And the people within the town all took pride in those three industries. It really connected the community. It gave everybody jobs, and it was a great symbolization. It was a great representation of how the people within the community take pride in their work. They do it well. They take care in it. It's not cheap. It's not quick. It's not about production and having a bunch of things done really fast so as to maximize profit. It's really, you take pride in the work. It's quality over quantity, and the people really took pride in it because that's part of the core. That's one of the core principles of community is hard work and taking pride in that hard work. Kind of, and not bragging about it, but just.
It was especially bolstered by World War II and just all the industry that exploded from the, what was it, war effort or something like that. That was the term. But then it just as time went on, sort of moving away from old Heartland, like post-Vietnam even, it just took a massive downturn. And just using Bloomington as an example again, I think the rails disappeared, in the mid-'70s and into the '80s?
Yeah, I believe
something
so.
like that.
Yeah.
And it just, that wasn't just in Bloomington either. It was all over this country. Just cities were becoming more car and automobile focused, and it just it just sort of upended everything in terms of industry.
Exactly. But what you see with that is, culture change as well. So obviously in Bloomington today, you don't have the radio factory. You don't, the train station where the rail yards were, that's like a farmer's market now.
That's a whole park. That's switchyard.
Right. So, there's been a lot of changes going on in the community, and I think the culture within the community is almost a reflection of that. I look around, like for example, in my town, I come from a small town, and a small town in Illinois, and it's still a group of people. It's pretty tight knit, but it's not that same blue collar feeling that most of these heartland towns I think have. It's more of, we're together, but it's almost like we live in the same space. We're not bound by this struggle, by this, by the work that we do. And I think it's very noticeable. But I think also noticeable is when there are, big events that affect the entire community. So for example, like World War II, Vietnam, or even COVID just a few years ago, I think it really brings out the connection within the heartland because it reestablishes that, that struggle that unites the whole community.
Mm-hmm. And those connections are still definitely there today. They didn't disappear with things disappearing
Right, exactly.
as time went on. Like, again, focusing in on Bloomington, I don't think I've ever lived somewhere that's more connected than
Right.
Bloomington. It's just, there is so much going on here. And there's still some of that old sense still in Bloomington. Like quarries are still
Right,
here. There's
exactly.
still old industry here.
Yeah.
There's still definitely a lot of some of that older, I can't really think of the word right now, but like style, I guess.
Yeah.
That's not the
Yeah,
word that I'm
exactly.
thinking of, but you know what I mean.
Right.
And then just sort of onto like the revitalization part in there, but Bloomington, when I was coming up with all this, Bloomington is really the only, like focusing on Bloomington, it had a revitalization. It came back, it bounced back.
Definitely.
Meanwhile, so many other towns simply just died.
Yes.
So many other towns are still suffering to this day.
Exactly.
So,
And I'm sure they're not unlike the towns that we saw in God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater. The community just, it didn't die. It's almost like it's not changing anymore. So one of the old principles, or I guess stereotypes of a heartland community, of like the people within the community, is that they'll weather the storm. They'll get through the struggle. They'll be stuck. If the
that's
town
better
is
than
dead,
saying that it died
Right.
off. Yeah, that's better.
Yeah,
than
exactly.
saying,
If the town is dead, or quote unquote dead, they're not going to move. They're going to get through it because this is, they're stubborn. This is where they're from.
Mm-hmm.
This is what they do. My parents are the same way. My grandparents are the same way. But usually when you look at, a heartland community, a good indicator of if it's, I guess, alive, if it's doing well, is the presence of, it's the people that desire change. So you see that in protests. You see that in various different movements. You saw it post-World War II when we looked at Sex in the Heartland. Those different movements, I guess. It was very interesting, but you had people that were fighting for a change and people that were fighting for it to stay the same. It's the same thing when we looked at, what was it, that article in Bloomington about the Little 500, about how the black students weren't allowed admission or something. And it was like, you had people fighting for it. You had two sides, one fighting, for change and one fighting to stay the same, but they both were fighting so that they were both fighting because they believed the town would be better off for their side, and they fought for it. And so some of these quote-unquote dead towns, you don't really see that too much. You don't really see it too often.
They're very much against change. They
Yeah.
are very, almost to a detriment, stuck in their ways, but they're still there.
Right,
Just,
exactly. It's a tough thing to see, and you can tell, in some of these, I've been to actually some of these, dead towns a couple times. I've been to, my great aunt lives in, she lives near one up in Wisconsin that I visit from time to time, and she, I see it, but I see it within the community, and I don't know, I mean, the people are still connected. You can tell there's an underlying, connection by struggle here that, it's very interesting to see. And,
that makes sense.
I think it's great, but I think, a struggle like that is different from a temporary struggle like COVID or like war, like a war effort back home in World War II. I think a struggle like that is more long-lasting, and you need people within the community that are willing to take initiative for change. And that's easier said than done.
You need a younger generation to bring that in, and something that sort of attributes to Heartland's struggles is that a lot of the younger generation leaves. Like, you don't have younger people bringing in new ideas into these tiny towns, and they just sort of, I don't know, like, slip by or don't experience the change necessary for a town to grow. Like, thinking about Sarah Smarsh.
Right.
She grew out, or, well, I wouldn't say grew out, but like, she didn't see her life going anywhere meaningful if she continued to stay in this town, so she left. And she's not alone in that. And so many people are leaving these small towns, and the population there is just in general getting older.
Right.
And
Yeah.
A lot
Tough
of
to see.
it is, and a lot of these older people are just so adverse to change, I guess.
Yeah.
So to say.
It's not unfortunate, I don't want to say, but it feels like these communities are more surviving than they are living. It's tough, and sure, COVID didn't help, but COVID changed. I mean, it changed basically the culture of the world, if you think about it. I mean, look at how many things are online now. Look at, the difference in communication that we can have. The online communication just grew, at an exponential rate out of it was essential.
Yeah.
Is what I'm trying to say, but it's quite cool to see. And I don't know, when if there's two people separated within the community, but you can see it, the ability to communicate online, whereas back then you probably couldn't do that, that has helped, reestablish connections. It's helped, strengthen connections, strengthen bonds within the community. It's quite cool to see that those connections are still there even when they're separated. If you're from the town, you're from the town. And it's, the people love you, the people, they're with you because they understand you're one of them. You might be gone, you might not be there right now, but, you're one of them. And it's, that's part of that connection, I think, the dynamics within the community.
Well said. So, moving on a little bit, do you think, like, looking towards the future, looking 10, 20 years from now, where do you think Heartland's going to be?
Well, it's tough to say. I don't know. I think the connection will stay there because I think connections within Heartland communities are like the best example or the best representation of just literally not even small town America. Just like, I don't know, to me that just feels like part of the American dream, to be connected with your community like that and to be living that life, that you have options, you have a community that cares about one another. I mean, what more could you really want? I think it'll be tough. I think, with how many things are online now, with kind of how Heartland is struggling in the current economic state, You'll see a little bit more of these dead towns, and I think that's very unfortunate. But I think they'll stay. I think the community, the dynamics of community, the one thing that hasn't changed through the decades really is just the connection, between the people, and that's, I don't think it changes now. I really don't. I think the connection stays. I think the connection holds people together. And honestly, it's something that'll probably go unnoticed by a lot of people, but I think it's something to be admired.
Pretty much, yes, I'm in the same, I'm of the same mindset as you. People, like, those connections are important, and people will find a way to get them. And I think as time goes on, a lot of people will probably sort of want that, like, they'll want that community feel, and they'll probably seek it out. And I think Heartland will survive because of that. People will probably move out there, and probably
right.
As cities get bigger and as housing gets more expensive, looking into sort of the political and economic side of things, people will probably want to have that sort of smaller town lifestyle. And I think a lot of people move back out there. They'll see, like, oh, this community is super tight-knit. They love that sort of feel to it, and just, I think, like you said, community, and I think it'll help it to grow as time goes on, but getting there is going to be super hard.
Yeah.
It's going to be a struggle, especially through all the economic downturns, the aging population, but especially politically, because a lot of these smaller towns they tend to run very conservative,
Right.
and a lot of people who like to bring in change are often turned away from these towns.
Right.
So
And oftentimes the opportunity for young people lies within the cities.
that is true.
It's
too.
not,
You're not going to find the same amount of opportunities out there.
right, exactly.
But
I mean, in Bloomington, I imagine, as a kid growing up in, say, the 60s, you had options. You could obviously go to school in Bloomington, but you could also, you find a job at the quarry or in the radio factory, at the railroad. Even, open up a small business within the town. That just doesn't seem
seem viable anymore.
exactly. The dynamics of the economy and really the heartland, the quote unquote stereotypical heartland town itself have just kind of, they've changed to where the opportunity doesn't really lie in these small towns. You have to go look for the opportunity. If you want to come back, you can come back if there is opportunity there. But with the current state of the economy, it's all about opportunity. And the connection isn't lost. I think we should add, connection is never lost within these towns. But it's stressed a little bit. And I think as a result, you're going to see some of the populations of these towns decreasing, which, like I said, it's unfortunate, but it is what it is.
It is, yeah, it is what it is, and it comes in waves as well.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see where things sit in 10, 20 years. So anyways, I think, is that all we had? So, all right.
That's about it.
So, awesome. Thank you very much for listening, and hope you enjoyed.